So I do have a few items I just want to go over before we start the presentation. Please know that this meeting is being recorded. That way we can post it to the project webpage. And if you want to view it again or share it with your neighbors who were not able to attend tonight, we should have it posted in about a week, and we will add the link to the project webpage in the chat. And then during the presentation, we ask that you keep your video off and microphone muted. And during the discussion session, we encourage you to turn your video on if you feel comfortable doing so. Next slide. We hope everyone will feel comfortable sharing their questions and comments either verbally or in the chat. Please be respectful of others and mindful of everyone's time. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly via email if you would like to provide comments or discuss the project that way. We'll put my email in the chat as well. Next slide, please. So after the presentation, we will have a listening and discussion session. So if a question or comment comes up during the presentation, feel free to add it to the chat, and we'll try to address it after the presentation or via email after the meeting. If you'd like to speak during the discussion session and you're joining via Zoom on a computer, use the raise hand button and we will unmute you. If anyone is calling in on a phone, use *9 to raise your hand. And once we call on you, use *6 to unmute and to mute again. And the next slide, please. So this is our agenda. We'll start with an introduction of the project team and then hear an update on the coastal resilience for East Boston waterfront, followed by a brief listening and discussion session on that topic. Then the Greenway design team will go through a presentation summarizing the analysis to date and proposed design concepts. This will be followed by a listening discussion for the Greenway. And finally, we'll finish with closing remarks and next steps. A lot of items to cover, but we're going to try to get through it as quickly as possible. Next slide. So joining us tonight, we have Reverend Mariama White-Hammond, Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space. Also joining us is Parks Commissioner Ryan Woods and Environment Commissioner Allison Brizius. Once again, I'm Amy Linne, the project manager from Boston Parks, overseeing the Greenway project. And then Weston and Sampson is the landscape architecture firm working on the Greenway. And from the design team, we have Farah Dekak. I would like to welcome any elected officials and staff who may be on the call and ask that you raise your hand if you'd like to say something at this time.
Hi, everyone. Gabriela Ramirez here on behalf of Councilor Gabriela Coletta. Thank you so much for hosting this meeting. The Council looks forward to hearing updates on the coastal resilience work for the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway, and we're here to support you and hear feedback from the community and from the city.
Great. Thank you, Gabriela. Okay. And next slide, please. So these are the city's policy priorities, which guide all the work that we do. So they include creating a place for residents that is family friendly, green and growing, for example, increasing the tree canopy and adding green infrastructure, healthy and safe, delivering exceptional city services, and closing the racial wealth gap. Next slide. So I will now turn it over to the Climate Ready Boston team to talk about coastal resilience updates in East Boston.
Thank you so much, Amy. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Wagner. I'm a climate resilience project manager with the City of Boston Environment Department. And I'm here with a couple of other members from our team to talk a little bit about the coastal resilience component of the Greenway and the surrounding area. So you can go to the next slide, please. So, as you can see on this map, which some of you might be familiar with or recognize from the Climate Ready East Boston Plan, Coastal Resilience Solutions Plan, you can see near the red where the arrows are circled that this is an area where floodwaters are likely to come in and enter and flood inland areas, which is what we refer to as a flood pathway. So as you can see here, there are 3 near-term entry points for this area, the Marginal Street waterfront. And in the current 1% annual chance flood, water would cross the waterfront at Lewis Street and the area next to Piers Park. And then with 9 inches of sea level rise, which is what we're expecting for the time horizon of 2030, that same level of flooding would also enter between Clippership Wharf and 99 Sumner Street. And then that water would flow from these locations to the Greenway entrance, which is really why we're here and talking about this today. And so why is this a risk? Well, really the Greenway entrance is very low. It's about a foot lower than the current 1% annual chance flood level and slopes downward moving north, which really puts the Greenway at risk of flooding from coastal floodwater coming in from the harbor. And not only does this mean that the Greenway itself could flood, but really that water could spill out and spread to low-lying areas between the Greenway, Meridian Street, and Bennington Street, and then also threaten the MBTA Blue Line tunnel portal near Bremen Street Park, and then the Sumner and Callahan tunnels. So what we want to tell you about today is what we're really doing about this. Obviously, this is a risk, but we do have projects in place and in motion to really address this coastal flooding risk. The first of which is the deployable flood barrier that is currently the city currently has a deployable flood barrier. You can see the location indicated there, thank you, at the Sumner Street overpass to protect the areas to the north from this coastal flooding risk. So really to cut off in the event of a large storm. So we're talking something along the lines of a big hurricane or a very, very large nor'easter where we would experience this level of flooding. The city would deploy this aqua fence that we currently have to close off the Greenway and protect the areas north of the deployable flood barrier from coastal flooding. And Amy will be talking a little bit later on about some maintenance and operational improvements to the deployable, but we really, it's really good to know that this is here, this is in place to protect from coastal flooding threats. But we also want to emphasize that this deployable is not a permanent solution. Our goal really is to have full passive protection solutions along the water's edge. And that really means that it's not something that needs to be put in place or taken down, but something that is there as part of the landscape. It's its own feature and its own project. And really what we want to do is have a couple of layers of resilience protection. So we're not relying only on one solution that could fail, but we provide a robust solution to coastal flooding that protects the neighborhood and from this coastal flood pathway. And so what I'm going to do now is pass it along to my colleague Delaney from the Boston Planning and Development Agency, who's going to talk about our efforts to build coastal protection at the water's edge to really close those 3 entry points that you see circled on the map here. So Delaney, over to you and on to the next slide.
Thank you, Hannah. Hi, everyone. I'm Delaney Morris, she, her, Senior Climate and Coastal Resilience Infrastructure Delivery Project Manager at the BPDA. Lewis Mall, Carlton Wharf, and Piers Park Lane, though close in proximity, present different challenges and serve as examples of different coastal conditions throughout the city of Boston. The sites are part of the waterfront's historic fill area and are low-lying. These areas currently flood during storm events. They are within the FEMA Special Flood Hazard Area, and they have been identified through Climate Ready Boston projections and the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model, MCFRM, as near-term 2030 flood pathways. In order to act as a barrier to future sea level rise of 40 inches and the 2070 1% annual chance storm based on the results of the MCFRM, the city's recommended design flood elevation for all 3 sites is 22.5 BCB. To achieve this, in 2020, the BPDA applied for and received funding for the initial 30% schematic design to address these pathways through the state's Office of Coastal Zone Management. In 2021, that study concluded and served as the basis for a secondary grant application to FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP, which we applied to in December of 2022. FEMA is actively reviewing this application. In fact, we just received our second request for information that we are now working to address. The proposal submitted in the application includes elevating the Carlton Wharf waterfront by 6.5 feet. Lewis Mall, however, given environmental regulations, existing infrastructure challenges, and community feedback, will be raised using a phased approach. The first phase of this project, which is permittable and included within the most recent grant application to FEMA, will bring the Lewis Mall waterfront area up to 19.5 Boston City base, protecting it from the 2070 5% annual chance storm based on the results of the MCFRM. Further funding will be secured later to complete phase 2 of the Lewis Mall site to bring it up to the elevation 22.5 BCB. And at the third flood pathway, which abuts the second phase of Pierce Park that recently opened, Massport, who we are working with closely, has committed to delivering protection up to 19.5 BCB, consistent with phase 1 of Lewis Mall. These projects are consistent with the goals and actions in Boston's 2021 Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan, as well as the 2017 Coastal Resilience Solutions for East Boston Phase 1 report. The total project cost is estimated at just under $25 million, with a federal cost share requested at $15 million and a local match estimated at an additional $10 million to complete the final design, permitting, and construction. The projects for Carlton Wharf, Lewis Mall, and Pierce Park Lane will create a waterfront for Bostonians that is climate resilient through site elevation, while also supporting community resilience objectives of accessibility, recreation, connections, views, social spaces, and ecological features. The design of these projects reflect feedback from community engagement and protect neighborhood character while ensuring services and infrastructure will function during and after hazard events. Any next phase of this project will include a full suite of community engagement. So please keep up with our project webpage for any developments and feel free to reach out to me at any point in the future as well. Thanks, and I'll pass it back to Hannah.
Thanks, Delaney. So I want to give you a sense of the projects that are going on in this area that will affect you as an interested resident. And at this time, I want to pass it over to Chief Whitehammond for any remarks that she'd like to make. Chief?
Thank you, Hannah and Delaney. So I just wanted to, I think the core focus of this meeting is really about how we enhance the Greenway, which we know is already a treasured community resource in East Boston. And we felt like we should be transparent with the group about some of the decisions and the way that we're looking at how this should move forward. So I think you saw from that diagram, this is an area that is of critical importance to protecting a significant portion of East Boston. The reality is that the water that comes in along these 3 potential entry points has the potential to flood folks significantly inland from the coast. And so it's pretty important. You also heard people lay out specific steps that we're trying to take and the work that we're trying to do. We want to name a couple of decisions that have been made and a couple of decisions that are outstanding. So we've had significant conversations with Massport, and I think we have come to an understanding of what needs to happen. I want to be transparent that we have not fully locked down all of those decisions at the level we might want to assure that there's full alignment. And so we want to be transparent about that because it affects another decision that we've also made. As was noted, we want to get to the point where we are not using deployables as a way to protect people. They are a great interim solution because they make sure that for a relatively low amount of money, we are able to protect people but without building, for instance, a large wall or doing something that would be drastic in such a way that we take away possible amenities and access during the times where they're not flooding potentials. And the Greenway is a perfect example. As many of you know, that sort of underpass area. We think it would be a significant loss to sort of fill that up and try to raise the entire piece, and it would change a number of the key features in the Greenway. However, we did look at the possibility of using the Greenway in the same way we have in other coastal projects as a potential flood protection area. And I give that example of the work that we've done, for instance, in Papalola Ngoni Park in the North End. In that instance, we actually elevated the entire park and changed significant features about the park and addressing the flood wall there in a way that provides significant protection to members of the North End community. However, when we looked at that same kind of approach here, what we found is that in many instances, the changes to the Greenway that would be required to change the elevation were so significant that we actually felt like it changed the very character of the park. Because this area is much thinner, it doesn't offer the same exact opportunities to regrade, and it would have required the cutting down of quite a number of trees. And we know that East Boston does not have enough trees to begin with. We've been really grateful. The Parks Department has been working really closely with Tree Eastie, and many of you, I'm sure, have participated in the work to try to increase the number of trees in East Boston. And so when we looked at the possibility of raising this park so that it could become a flood protection area, the changes required of the area were so significant. It did not align with the initial things that we've heard from you about what you want this park to look like and the way you want it to serve the community. But we felt like we could not make that decision without being transparent and at least allowing people to know why we've done that, and to maybe have some space for people to ask questions. What it does mean is that it will require that the interventions we've already looked at, particularly in terms of Lewis Wharf, are also deeply supported by matching investments from Massport to raise the water's edge, to raise that road closer to the water's edge and prevent the water from getting in the first place, rather than raising the park to absorb all of that water and protect the areas behind it. So we just wanted to make sure that people have a clarity about that, and that we didn't make that decision, which is a pretty, important decision, without letting folks know that we were starting from the frame, that we would continue with work at the closer to the coast as opposed to doing significant work within the park, because of how deeply it would change the nature of that area. So I'm going to pause there. I think I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to ask questions. Nothing is off the table. If we know the answer, we'll tell you. If not, we'll say, okay, we'll get back to you on that one. But wanted to make sure that we were transparent about that. Any questions or comments?
I have one comment about the deployable location that you have, and I'm not really sure how much. I'm sure a lot of planning went into where that location would be, but if water floods behind that, the Orleans Street and Marginal Street area and Webster Street, I saw the water back when they had the perfect storm. The water went straight down the Greenway and didn't affect, the waterfront neighborhood as much as maybe it did some of the other, I don't know what it did to the other neighborhoods down. But that was the worst storm and the worst flooding I've ever seen here in East Boston, and that was in 1991. But when I saw the deployable wall there, my first thought is, well, it's going to back up the water to these other neighborhoods, and how fair is that really? I know that it's flooding and it's disaster, and you're trying to save as much property as you can, but at expense of other properties potentially.
Yeah, Jim, I think you're raising exactly why we believe that we have to move urgently on this longer term solution, because the deployable really isn't. It is a stopgap. It helps reduce, but it doesn't prevent and it doesn't address at the scale we know that we need to. And that's why we actually did have the design team, and we had people do a quick look at, like, is there something else that we could do that would actually make the Greenway a more substantial part of the resilience while keeping its character? We just didn't arrive at any solutions that both kept the trees, kept a lot of the green space, kept it a place that people would actually enjoy using, while also, for instance, turning it into a berm. Because once you turn it into a berm, for those of you who I know looked at that, I see Valerie's on the call, a few other people who've looked at some of the berms we've created in other areas, but we were able to do that because we had significantly larger amounts of space. And so you could actually contour it in ways that made the berm feel like a feature of the park. In this instance, that wasn't really possible because the park is so narrow and skinny. It would actually make it relatively unusable to the people who are actually trying to enjoy it as a park. So that's one of the space constraints we have. And we are absolutely in agreement with you that a deployable is a short-term solution. It is not a long-term solution. What the longer-term solution really is to do the important work closer to Lewis Mall and really get that shift at the water's edge, including some of the work we're going to continue to be in conversation with them about Pierce Park too, because it is doing some more. We believe there's even more we could do.
Okay, the next person is Alex. I'm going to unmute.
Thank you. Thanks, Rev Whitehammer. I have two questions, if that's okay. One is, are you talking about Massport raising up East Pier Drive? And what's the benefit to that over the city just raising the entrance at Marginal Street?
Yeah, we need to raise the entire, we need to raise the road because you can't allow any low point to exist where the water can get in. The water only stops from coming in if everything is raised to the sufficient level that it doesn't, it can't get in anywhere. Because what you do is if you close off one, it just will come in more forcefully at the other side. And so this requires a level of coordination really between us, between Massport, between MBTA. I mean, there's a number of us that have to really work together, and we have started talking about that. Now, I do want to note really quickly, some of what we're talking about is mostly around sea level rise. There are also some other pieces around stormwater, and Amy's going to talk about that a little bit more later. There are some solutions we've been able to come up with around stormwater. So I just want to note that the truth is that East Boston and I live in Dorchester, I live really close to Moakley Park. We had people kayaking in over on Morrissey. So, we're another neighborhood that's sort of struggling about this, but the only way to make it work is to cut off all the routes for the water to come in.
Okay, thank you. My other question was about stormwater management. I mean, the Greenway for most of the winter is flooded. Right now, it's like a mud pit. And it's because there's, the acres of parking lot that are owned by the health center, and that stormwater is not managed on their property. So it all just flows into the Greenway and washes out all the dirt, trash, mulch, leaves, and everything else. So is there anything that can be done about that? The health center.
We'll talk there. I think there's some space to talk about some things. I think there's some things we can fix and some things that are a little bit more challenging, but I think Amy's going to bring that in because we think that fits squarely within the park design process, and we do have some options there. think we have Valerie next.
Hi, I'm Valerie Burns. I'm a board member of the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway. Excited about this meeting. I have a question about the deployable, which was installed maybe 3 years ago or so, maybe a little longer. And as Alex mentioned, the Greenway does flood because of severe storms and does it quite regularly. I was wondering, since the deployable is immediate and some of this work is probably going to take a few years to accomplish or more. I'm wondering if the deployable has ever been used, and do we know that it works?
So yeah, so a couple things. We have done some practices. One of the things you're going to talk about during the design is, one of the suggestions is, currently we're storing it at the stadium. That doesn't work. What we found in the when we did the practice is having the actual units so far from where we need to deploy them increases the chance that something could go wrong. And so one of the things that we're going to ask for is, really the blessing of the community to put a storage unit in the park, because we would not want to see this not protected because it had to be hauled from somewhere else and then something went wrong, so that and we can get super excited about how we paint that and make it beautiful and part of the landscape. But it is because we tried to practice that we said that whole process of getting it into a truck and moving it over, it is super heavy. And it was actually most of the drama getting it to the location. So we now know that that doesn't work. So we'd like to put it on site, and then we would have yet another practice where we try it on site and see if that eliminates some of the challenges we experience.
I see. That's great to hear. I actually had been hoping it was stored in the fire station, which is right next to the Greenway. So the fact that it's in White Stadium, I'm glad that you've done the practice, and because deployables are of concern, because someone has to be there at the right time with the right amount of people in order to put it in place. So
Yes.
I appreciate hearing about that. Thank you.
I think we have Elizabeth Muller next.
Hi, I guess I could put the video back on. I'm the president of the Friends of the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway, serving on the board with Valerie. Thank you so much for putting this Zoom call together to deliver this information. It's extremely important, obviously, for us, and we've been interested in the progress. I know it's very complicated, and there are a lot of parties and moving parts. But could you please provide us some time frame here that you're now looking at? We got an overview on a very big ticket item, and I caught the $25 million project with $15 million federal funding, and a lot of different agencies that need to be involved. I'm just wondering if you've got a project timeline for when the next meetings are happening, where you're going to be working alongside Massport and other agencies to keep this project going. Because I've heard you say, and I thought this was great, the deployable is temporary. It's an interim solution. It's not something we want to invest a lot of time and effort in. What we really want is raising up the elevation nearer to the harbor. So now that there seems to be I'm hearing urgency, which is great. Just wondering what your plans are in terms of a forecasted time frame.
Yes. So I'm going to elevate a couple of things that have, let's just say this. When I first came in, this was one of the very first projects that I looked at. We put in the FEMA application. It's actually one of the early things that one of the first things where my name was actually on the application as chief, and I had to sign something. I believed at that point that we would have already been through the FEMA process by now. And I think that was a reasonable expectation. So that is one of the core challenges, that the FEMA timeline has been delayed beyond what is the case in other parts of the country. That's the most diplomatic answer that I can give. I can say that I would have thought we would be moving along and we would have been having the community meetings around this towards the end of last year. But until FEMA is finished adjudicating, that is a barrier. I can say we are working to address that barrier on this project and others. And that's what I can say in a public meeting. I will also say that we have had detailed conversations with Massport. It is, as many people might know, a challenge to move things when there is not a current leader sort of moving the ship. And so we have certainly advocated on that issue too. One thing that could be great for the community to assist in this is that when a leader is identified and in place, it would be very helpful that the East Boston community might independently share your perspective with that leader in addition to what we might be sharing, because that is another critical element that would be very important to moving this forward. But I can say that within the work that's happening between the Environment Department and really the EEOS cabinet, because Parks has been an essential part of much of the resilience work that's been done to date. This project is our top priority, as it is one of the most clearly currently flooding places in the city. We're also looking at Ryan Playground in Charlestown. We are also moving to Nain Beach in Dorchester. We are also moving Long Wharf. So there's a number of places, but we have looked at the places that are actively flooding right now, and every single one of them has some sort of application or collaboration that we've been moving. This was one of the earlier ones, and so it should have already been moving. And that's what I can say. I believe in the power of community organizing. I used to be one. Sometimes it can do things that it can help government move. Any other questions? Yes. Elizabeth, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, just wanted to emphasize that we are the right organization to try to help you with that community support. I would like to follow up with you afterwards and brainstorm on how we might be helping you move this dial forward.
Would love to partner with you on that. I mean, I think we all know the impacts. I think probably most of us on this call live in flood-prone areas, and we know how it's getting worse. So yes, we can use all the support we can get in pushing to make this a priority for everyone. But I can tell you it's our top priority. We're just not in this only by ourselves.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to hand it back to Amy, and I think you're going to go much deeper into design and how to make the park even more beautiful and useful. But if there are follow-up questions that you have after this, feel free to reach out to Amy. We will certainly follow up, but wanted to make sure that folks had this context and understood how we are thinking about this in the context of the Greenway. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief White Hammond. Barra, do you want to go to the next slide? So this does just provide a little more information on the deployable flood barrier, what that looks like, and the benefits that it does provide when deployed. And because it is something that the parks maintenance crew will put into place, we've been working with them on providing a storage location. And then next slide, Farah. So we expect it will look something like this. Ideally, there's maybe an opportunity to paint or wrap it with something more decorative. The location we're still studying because we're trying to strike a balance between proximity to the underpass at Sumner Street and not blocking views for people on the Greenway, sight lines impacting that. So I think it'll be a little bit more investigation, and then we can certainly give everyone an update at the next meeting. Okay, so we actually we did those questions and comments, so we can go ahead to the next slide. And we can now focus on the Greenway project. So I will turn it briefly over to Commissioner Woods to say a few things.
Thanks, Amy. It's great to be on here tonight. We have just about 50 people on here, and it's great to see some familiar faces with Sal and Valerie and Karen and Vidya, Michelle, Bill Masterson, people that we've been working with for decades on East Boston projects, and more specifically at the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway. I want to thank the friends of the Mary Ellen Welch Greenway for all your advocacy and work. I had the opportunity at the end of last year to meet Elizabeth and walk some of the site with her and hear some of the exciting things that the friends are looking into and want to work on as we move forward. But I want to think about the dedication. I mean, so many people use this Greenway on a daily basis, whether it's traversing to work, for respite, recreation. And I know I used to always hear from the senator when she was cutting through all the time. I always got updates on where the water levels were, if the pumps were working, if they weren't working. So it was great to always hear that. We worked on repainting the caboose this year. We got a lot of the art project that was on there scraped off and repainted. And we're continuing to work with Troy, who's trying to open a small business there. There was actually a call today with Water and Sewer about the proper way to hook things up. So that is finally moving forward. We love seeing the memorial garden that was planted to honor Mary Ellen, and I was happy to join many of you out there at the dedication that's there. And obviously Kate England and her team too from the Green Infrastructure division with the city for the work they did on installing the rain garden that's a little midway through. So thanks to Kate and your team for that. So we're really looking forward to this project. We have just over $2.8 million in construction funds to move this forward. So I won't delay it all. Let the work get started. And thank you all for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate that. So let's go to the next slide. So I think many of you know this project had sort of an initial community engagement in the summer of 2022, and then a bit of a pause and a project manager change. So thank you for sticking with us as we restart the project. So looking at the schedule going forward, this is our first design meeting. We will take feedback from this meeting to move forward with the design for the Greenway, and then we'll share that progress at a second meeting, which likely will be in March. We'll hopefully nail that down soon, that date. And then we anticipate the final design and permitting to happen through this summer and fall, and then construction starting in 2025. Next slide. So for this meeting, our goals are really to re-engage with the community on the project, discuss strategies for ensuring the Greenway is usable during and after storm events, discuss design concepts for a new path alignment and Greenway amenities, and then gather some updated input on how the community uses the Greenway and how they would like to see it used in the future. Next slide. And then this is just a quick overview of our project approach. So for designing public parks, we include community input, such as this meeting tonight, safety guidelines and regulatory guidelines, such as ADA, the City of Boston priorities, and the Parks and Recreation goals. And with that, I will turn it over to Farah from Weston and Sampson.
Yeah, it's really great to see lots of people on here tonight, and just a really exciting project that, you know, we, as Amy mentioned, we had done a site walk back in July 2022. And at the same time as that site walk, we also launched a online survey. And what we're showing here tonight is only a snippet of the questions that we gathered and the information that we asked during that online survey. The survey, I believe, was up for about a month, and we got about 80 responses, or just under 80 responses, and really great enthusiasm to see improvements to the Greenway. Here we've captured just a snippet of those results, sort of focusing on what we heard, which was most respondents wanted to see general improvements to the Greenway's conditions, lots of shaded spaces to sit, reduced flooding came up quite a bit, and so that's why we've structured the presentation tonight the way we have, and also we'll discuss flooding further on as we speak about, as we speak through the slides tonight. And then just a general, wanting to see increased biodiversity and also better amenities in terms of seating and, benches and signage and other items that, we'd like to improve as part of the project. And then we'll have a few slides. So we'd like to use Slido as a method of gathering input from folks tonight. So I'll throw the link in the chat. We're hoping that you can follow that link, or if you have a phone, that you can kind of scan that QR code that's up on the screen. I know this first interaction will be a bit jumpy as you try to get to the link and the website, but we're hoping this is one way we'll gather input. Oh, great. So somebody's already jumped on there. So I'll keep it up for a few minutes just to get people to get to the website, and then use the number that's on the screen. And then there'll be a few more moments where we'll ask folks to jump back onto that website. So if you keep it up, it'll be a smoother transition the next time. And obviously at the very end, we'll have an open discussion just like we just did, and you can unmute yourself and, talk to us about your thoughts. And yep, great. QR code made it easy. That's good. It's good to see lots of people. We've captured about 15 people, so I'll give it an extra couple of minutes for folks to jump on there. As an overview for the rest of the presentation, I'll be sort of covering existing conditions, and then dial into some more specific site observations. And then we'll talk about sort of what we envision or our ideas for the Greenway. And then we'll want feedback from folks on the call to weigh in on that as well. Yep. Great. So that's great. We're it's good to see that folks are on the call today, or, use the Greenway quite often. And it's awesome to see that some folks on the call use it on a daily basis, actually. think it seems like we've tapered out, so maybe I'll move on to the next one. But the next time the Slido will pop up, it'll also have a QR code and a link. So you're more than welcome to try to get back on it in the next time we come around to it. Great. So I guess we're general overview of the existing conditions and the area that we're specifically dialing into. So the Greenway for the city of Boston owned portion of the Greenway starts at Marginal Street all the way to Porter Street, with a few really significant sort of cross intersections, Sumner Street, Maverick, and then the very sort of open space near Grove Street, where there's sort of this big entryway, which we'll have some photos of in the next slides. But the blue caboose that was mentioned, and lots of really beautiful community art in most of the underpasses, and some newer ones, which is great to see. Obviously, there's that the dual pathway that separates bike users from walkers. And so this plan up top, sort of in orange, shows the existing low spots that are prone to, that we found to be prone to flooding. I don't think it's extensive. I don't think it captures all the spots, but that's kind of what we're talking about tonight, and that's what we'll be covering as we work through the presentation. And so in the next two slides, we'll look at a few site observations that we made that do include sort of the ponding and extensive water that we're seeing on site. These are a few sort of images of observations, some sent to us by actually friends groups and other folks in the community. So that. And then a few more images of flooding and extensive, sort of water ponding along the Greenway, as well as sort of site observations. We've noted some erosion along the slopes of the Greenway. And so as we work through the design, we'll think through how to treat those areas and how to sort of mitigate some of that erosion along the sides. Next slide. So the causes for these flooding impacts. In the past couple of slides, I've covered the existing condition and observations on the site that many of you are aware of, and we want to dial into why these on-site conditions are being observed. Several factors cause flooding conditions. Those include the high water table, drainage pipes, and tidal conditions. The low elevation of the Greenway being one of the lowest spots in East Boston, as well as the impervious surfaces along the Greenway. So there's quite a few buildings and sort of parking lots that contribute to the overflow of water into the site from all sides. And just sort of acknowledging that the solution to these issues will require coordination between the city, as well as Boston Water and Sewer. And the goal would always be to build a robust green infrastructure network that addresses these concerns. And so the following 2 pages will sort of show what I just described, but in a more diagrammatic way. So, your water sort of comes down these slopes and usually heads towards a drainage point, and water's coming from sort of many sides. And sometimes when there's too much water coming down the slopes or coming down from adjacent properties, that's overwhelming the sort of the site infrastructure that exists out there. And so our charge and our project would be interested in finding ways to mitigate that those on-site conditions. And then similar condition here, so slopes, and then you've got drainage that maybe wasn't designed to carry as much water as it's receiving. And so we'd be looking at how to improve these conditions and ways to mitigate that. And I think what's interesting here is you sort of see this certain moments where the elevation between the two paths is there's an elevational difference. And we think that that could be one way to capitalize on what exists out there and strengthen that condition. So you can see a moment where the site might be flooded and one pathway that's lower may not be as accessible, but the elevated pathway would be. So that's kind of one condition that we noticed on site and are thinking through how to incorporate that into our designs as we move forward. So I guess another, I think I have two more Slido slides in this section. I'll give folks a moment to jump on. The question we're asking is, how do you currently use the Greenway? And I believe you can pick multiples, so you're not limited by one option. Amy, feel free to jump in if you've got anything to add so far. Great. Yeah, I guess the commute one is interesting, just to find out more about how folks commute, where to, and it's certainly a good method of commuting. I assume it's biking when you say commuting, but it'll be interesting to dial into that question and hear from folks. Yep, and definitely walking includes lots of dog walkers. Okay. Great. So over the next five or so slides, I'll just speak to sort of the concepts that we're working through, and then we'll do a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up to discussion. So we're thank you for your patience and really appreciate everybody's time tonight. Yeah, great comment about the Greenway connecting many community resources, health centers, schools, YMCA, and other sort of community spots. Nice. All right. Whoop. That work? Okay, great. So another question that we had is, what improvements are most critical? So you can sort of rank those four responses. I'm sure we missed some. I'm sure that there are others that folks want to bring up as improvements they'd like to see, but we're sort of, so I'll read them out. What are improvements that are most critical for the Greenway? Better amenities, increased tree canopy and biodiversity, reduce flood impacts, and then cooling spots, in brackets, sort of drinking water, shaded seating areas, and the like. Yep, lighting as another amenity that needs help. We'd be curious to hear specifics around lighting, if there's dark spots, or if there's sort of really, if it's just a general improvement that needs to happen. But we can open that up. Great. So I'll so it sounds like there's one more person. It's also reduced flood impacts being a big one, better amenities being second, increased tree canopy and biodiversity, and then last is cooling spots, which generally lines up with what we heard on the poll done back in July 2022. Great. So, oh, let's see, one more person just came in. All right, I'm gonna sort of launch into the concept sections. As I said, I'm gonna sort of present through 3 sections or 3 concepts that we're thinking through. Ultimately, we believe that we'll likely end up with a combination of the section of the ideas we have tonight, but we want to hear feedback on them to begin with, and that will help us set the priorities as we work through the design, because, you know, as you know, we're constrained by the site and what exists out there, but we have room to play and room to work with. So concept number 1 looks at sort of just strengthening that that moment that I spoke about a few minutes ago. So you have an elevated path and a floodable path. So one that's lower, one that's slightly higher, and we would work with the existing grades on site. We're not trying to elevate it, you know, 6 feet in the air. It's more of what's reasonable within the site conditions, and while preserving vegetation on site and while preserving the sort of site's general aesthetics and what we love about the Greenway. So that's sort of the first concept that we're thinking through, which is really strengthening what's out there already and looking at areas where there are low spots where we can raise part of the site lightly to accommodate for flooding and to keep the site usable during flood events. And then sort of the second concept, similar, sort of looks at elevating in some areas because of the restraints on the site. The elevating off the site will require some level of retaining, and we would look at sort of natural materials for retaining and materials that would fit in with the rest of the park's general feel and, you know, and while also sort of keeping impervious surfaces to a minimum. I saw some comments about path materiality, and we can discuss that further as we work through the presentation and kind of open it up for discussion. And then the third concept, which I'll have a question at the end to ask folks to specifically weigh in on, is consolidating the 2 paths, your bike and your walking path, into one wider path that's slightly elevated as well. What that does is combining the paths would decrease the amount of impervious surface, as well as perhaps in some areas give more space for planting that would, you know, help also with absorbing of flooding. So that's a completely different approach to the Greenway, and we realize that that might sort of raised some red flags for some folks. So we want to hear about whether this idea is a viable one. Do people think it's reasonable to consolidate the paths, or are two paths, one for walking and one for biking, the way to go, and that's how it's always been done? And so hearing from folks at the end would be great to just know if this is a non-starter, or if we should explore it some more. And just noting that as somebody who uses the Southwest corridor, as I bike through it, there's always people walking on the bike path, and there's people, biking on the trail. So I think, and we've heard a similar comment about the Greenway. So just trying to tease out what folks in the community think about that. See many comments coming in the chat. I'll read some of them out as I work through the presentation. But here we've got some concept sort of precedent images of what we think this could look like. Sort of, this image on the left shows what that granite block sort of natural grade change could look like. So we would be very mindful of the aesthetics of the park that exists out there and just adding to it. And then just other bike path, bike trail images. And then last slide I have here to present about is site furnishing and planting images. And these are just sort of things that we'd look to improve. In addition to, I know I saw some comments about lighting, and we're definitely looking into how that can be improved and strengthened through the work that we do. Amy, do you want to, is there anything you'd like to add? Otherwise, I have 3 or 4 more Slido questions, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Yeah, I think on the lighting topic, we do assume that the fixtures that are out there will be upgraded to LEDs. We'll certainly do additional study to look at, are there areas that have inadequate lighting because of a lack of light poles? But I think if people have comments on that in specific areas, we'd love to hear it. But we do recognize that they need to be upgraded. So yeah, if you want to go through the last few Slidos, and then we can go through some of the chat comments, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what amenities would you most like to see at the Greenway? Benches, lighting upgrades, signage, native planting, picnic tables, walking space, bike space, performance space, outdoor classroom. So quite a lot of options there, and I believe you can vote for multiples, or at least that's the hope. That's how it should have been set up. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, there's a comment about the concept considering which side gets plowed in winter versus not. I don't know, Amy, if you want to address that.
No, I think that's a great comment. I
Yeah.
was out on site today, and there was definitely evidence of tire tracks and things beyond the path. So I think that goes back to the question of a single wider path versus the two narrower paths. There is an advantage, I think, if we have that one path that's 10 to 12 feet wide and provides enough space for a maintenance vehicle. We hope to avoid those tire ruts and damage to the lawn. So and I think the goal, and also the goal being that would be the part that's elevated so that it would get plowed and continue to be usable during all seasons. So I think that's certainly a great comment that we'll consider for this design.
Yeah, and these are very good sort of indicators of what folks are looking for. Native planting, benches, light upgrades. I also see in the comments somebody mentioned waste cans. So definitely locating some of those along the entrances and sort of where they're accessible for pickup so that they get picked up often and keep the site clean. So that's great to hear. I'll move on to the next Slido. What qualities would you like to see at entry spaces? So this is specific to Marginal Street and Grove Street entryways. Yeah, and a mention of more water fountains, which is a very good point. That would be definitely an improvement that we'd like to incorporate into the design. Underpass should have lighting. And yeah, of course, waste cans to be emptied. Oh, and somebody mentioned, and a few people liked emergency posts. So I think those are emergency blue boxes, and those can, we can look into incorporating those as well.
There's a question specifically about specialty paving. Do you want to elaborate maybe on what that could be?
Oh, I missed that. Sure. I think that would be thinking through paving, special paving at the entryways. So that way it gives a sense of arrival to the entry spaces. And obviously none of these are exclusive. We can do specialty paving, but also planting and, multiple things. It's just sort of trying to get a feel for what's most important to folks.
And you're talking maybe about like a concrete unit paver, for example.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, correct. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And sort of water fountains with, Great. So I'll move on to the last Slido, which is pretty simple. Would folks prefer a single wide path for pedestrian bike traffic combined, or two paths as is existing right now? So, I mean, this is not, this is a pretty, big point to make, and we want to make sure that we're mindful of that if it's a non-starter for folks and folks that use this community resource every day, that we just kind of step back and keep what's out there. But if there is sort of interest in combining, then we can look at that and study that further and sort of find where that's appropriate to combine, obviously while being mindful of tree cover and existing vegetation and obviously where the underpasses are, that will always need to be paved, the entire way through, but just trying to consolidate and yeah. 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 Kate made the comment that porous pavement materials come in all colors, which is very true, and acknowledge that. I think so. It sounds like there's maybe single width path might be okay. So we can explore that a bit more and make sure we come to the next meeting with more direction as to where that would happen and where we're exploring for that to happen, and that way folks have the opportunity to weigh in on that bit more. So I'll go to the next slide, which is the listening and discussion. Amy, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll try to monitor the chat as best as I can.
Great, thanks, Farah. I think that was helpful to see and get people's the comments that are coming in the chat. I think are really great and thoughtful. So it's already been a good discussion getting started. So if there's any, looks like we have a hand raised. Alex.
Thanks, Amy. I just wanted to ask if the Greenway would be open during construction, like passable. It's really tough to divert everybody out onto the street. There's not really a safe way to traverse for pedestrians, people on bikes, people with strollers or anything like that. So if it's possible to keep the Greenway open while it's under construction, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. I think it would be tricky. I think it'd be a trade-off in terms of the duration of that project. So, we'd certainly need to look at that once we have a contractor. I'm not sure that it's something that is feasible, but we'll certainly keep that in mind. See, Valerie, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, I have a question. I guess I'm a little concerned about the idea of the two paths, with one of them being floodable and one of them not. That feels like it's reducing the capacity of the Greenway by 50%. Because we're going to have more and more flooding, and so I'm concerned about that, and I'm wondering if one of the goals can be to maintain the current capacity of the Greenway with the solution for resiliency. Had you looked at capacity in
terms of how many users can be?
Yeah, I mean, there are times when it's really busy, and both paths are used in two directions, and there's bikes and walkers and people on other kinds of wheels, strollers, and all of that. And if one path was intended to be floodable and hold water, all of that traffic would go on to the remaining path. So so it feels like a reduction in capacity. So I'm just wondering am I understanding this correctly? And what is a reduction in capacity inevitable here? Is that what you're telling us, or is that not the case and there are different solutions? I'm confused.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think there's different ways that we can design it. I think the idea with the one lower path and higher path is that for those non-flooding conditions, it still has the two separate pathways, but and that's sort of why we were studying, well, would we just put one wider path at this higher elevation? I think when we get more into the design details, we'll be able to understand maybe how much space is needed for the water and how much space does that leave for a pathway. So maybe it can be that there's 2 elevated paths and a flooding zone in between, or different sort of studies on that I think will be helpful for us, because this is still very conceptual, I would say.
Right. And I mean, this is an old railroad corridor, so it is necessarily constrained. And as a railroad corridor, it also didn't have trees. So, those changes have come as the Greenway was developed. But I really do think we should try and retain capacity with what is here now, unless the solution, there's not another way. But I do think capacity is important to think about. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I think another thing we had talked about is what is the material of the elevated portion, and because we were thinking about vehicles using it, we saw that as needing to be essentially fill versus like decking or boardwalk, which is another sort of issue in terms of maintenance and longevity of material. But now that you say that, I don't know if there's an opportunity where the 2 sides are different material. One is fill, but maybe one is something that's narrower but doesn't have to accommodate a vehicle and can be elevated above. So yeah, we'll certainly we'll study that in our design process for sure.
Thanks.
Laura, did you want to add anything or comment at all? Sorry, I took all the.
Oh, yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think we're not imagining that the water stands there for a long time. It's just kind of providing a place for the water to go and then funnel out. But yeah, just trying to hold, but also provide opportunity for folks to use it when it is raining a lot and flooding. Yeah.
Could I just ask a follow-up question in terms of managing the water once it's there? Now we know that there's a pump system that often fails, and it has all kinds of operational problems and so on. Is your solution going to include some kind of pumping, or is it all going to be using different surfaces and elevations and moving the water off sort of on its own, not in some mechanical way?
Yeah, so there's limitations on the existing pump station in terms of the capacity, and well, like Water and Sewer has longer term plans that they, in their stormwater discharge analysis, they've shown proposed pump stations at the edge, the harbor's edge. So there may be a longer term improvement there, but right now at high tide, it's just not draining out. So I think the goal in this, we'll call it short term, but I guess it's, maybe it's 10 years, is to really not rely on those mechanical solutions. We think that the standing water, in most cases should be gone within 10 to 12 hours. So it's not something that, would hopefully persist beyond like that tidal cycle. But that's sort of the approach here, is really just focusing on those elevation changes. Let's see.
Yeah, we got another question about sort of a few more questions about closing during construction, and maybe perhaps the answer is more to do with phasing and how you can keep maybe the Bremen Street sort of as a more marginal street as a pass through until they really need to do work in that area. That way there's still some access through until it really is needed to do repairs. And you know, and as Amy, you mentioned, those conversations would happen during construction and maybe woven into the contract drawings so that the contractor knows ahead of time that some portions of the site are important to the community to stay open when safe, to allow for that sort of cut through for the community.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, you know, I certainly would reach out to BTD and see if there's anything, I don't know, that they have planned or can help us with that, to try to create safest pathway and bike route as possible. So yeah, I guess, you know, when I said we'll think about it during construction, we definitely will think about it beforehand. So.
Yeah, and some really robust conversation about one path versus two paths, and sort of just folks weighing in on both sides of the equation. Yeah, so some things about sort of dog walkers and really having a two paths allows for separations between dog walkers and bikes, which definitely makes sense. Some conversation about bike path being skinnier and sort of, you know, gravelly. I guess we can discuss that a bit more, but we haven't really gotten to the nitty gritty of specific path materials, but kind of good to see what folks are open to entertaining. Yep. Lots of erosion is happening from water runoff, from abutting paved parking lots, and we'd be looking at how to reduce that erosion, the effects of that erosion through planting and maybe harder solutions like riprap and sort of cobblestone that could hold some edges, but definitely planting being the preferred method of dealing with that. Great. And maybe Amy, if you have the link to the project website, maybe I'll go back up and try to grab it.
Actually, I will put
we shared it
in the
earlier.
chat here. So, oops, I should put these separately. So there's project webpage, my email. I will also put the Resilience Waterfront Project webpage. And Delaney's email. And yeah, Kelly, thanks for your question. So anyone that's on this meeting, I'll have your email. So I will be emailing you about the next meeting. And you know, if you know others that might want to participate, you know, please forward on to them. Like I said, we're hoping probably late, maybe mid to late March for the next meeting. But we will certainly let you know when that's scheduled. And it does look like we're running out of time. So if anyone has any final questions, please let us know. And I encourage you to email me if you have think of anything later or have questions. But we do really appreciate you all joining us tonight and spending this time here with us. It's really, I think, a really good, fruitful discussion. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you very much.